You might think Nietzsche would like the Stoics because they're sort of noble and they emphasize self-sufficiency, which is something which is very much in line with Nietzsche's general attitude, self-sufficiency and nobility of values. But uh, the essentially this problem that he has with the Stoics is the problem that he has with all philosophers, and I'll try and explain that um, as simply as possible. So the Stoic virtue is to live according to nature, to live, to follow nature's path and live that way, and to not get caught up in excess, and to not get caught up in things that aren't happening. One of the principal Stoic ideals is that if you can't control something, you shouldn't worry yourself about it because it's out of your control. It's not. It's a waste of time. So they're saying, um, only they're saying to align your motivations with what's actually happening in the natural world. Um, and that seems like a good idea, but what Nietzsche says of that is that what is the natural way? What do you mean live according to nature? Are you saying that there is a path inherent in nature, that there is a nature to nature, some kind of essence to nature that you're trying to follow? Because of course Nietzsche would say that there is no such essence. Nature is just crazy and insane and back and forth, contradictory, isn't going anywhere in particular. And I think the difference between Nietzsche and the Stoics here is like the difference between, say, Camus and Taoism, where Camus describes the reality as being absurd. It has no explanation. It's basically an open question mark, and that's reality. Whereas the Taoists, like Lao Tzu, says that there is some sort of natural way. That's what the Tao is. It's the way, the universal cosmic nature that if you can just get in line with, then everything becomes low. I guess you lose no energy in Lao Tzu's view if you follow the way, um, which is definitely different to Camus. On the one hand, you have absurd. There is no answer. You have to look at the world as if it's just a sort of hologram. There's no stability. Or then Taoism, which is that beneath all of the superficialities, there is some kind of there is a way. There is some path. So the Stoics are kind of like Lao Tzu there, where they're saying that at some area there is a path. There is some nature that you can follow. And Nietzsche's more like Camus, where he says, well, no, there isn't. You've made up this idea. And the reason he thinks that is that if you're going to say that if Stoics are going to reject certain things because they are not in accordance with nature, then they have to be saying that those things are not in accordance with nature. So they would say, for instance, that it's not natural to be worried about things that aren't happening. But then what Nietzsche would say is that, well, you worrying about things that aren't happening is an aspect of nature. You are just an aspect of nature yourself. So it's impossible to not live according to nature because nature is everything. So you have these like two choices. You either have, we're going to have a value where we live according to nature and exclude certain things, in which case you have to define nature, and it's not everything. You have some random arbitrary definition of nature. Or in the other case, you actually say anything that's in alignment with nature is good, in which case you have to say everything is good, because everything is by definition in alignment with nature. So I think the second point is impossible, because they obviously have ideals. The second point, to just say that everything is natural, I think, to be honest, that's kind of like Buddhism, I think, really, is if you take the Stoicism to its conclusion, which is that you're denying things that aren't natural, then you end up with there's nothing. It's kind of like if you try and live authentically, and you try and only do those things which you feel deeply and which you can honestly say that you understand, then I think what happens is this is like the process of meditation. I think what happens is eventually you realize that there is no such thing as authenticity. There is no me that can authentically interact with the world. This is an illusion. I think it's the same thing with the Stoic ideal. There is no ideal that you can hold up against nature. Well, there is no ideal that you can hold up if it's supposed to be in alignment with nature. if that's your only value. If your value is nature and you're saying, here's my ideal as opposed to other things, that's not possible. You should have no ideal. It collapses on itself. So the first case is that you actually do claim that nature has a certain essence and that you're following the essence of nature. And that is the fundamental philosophical tendency that Nietzsche is opposed to, finding the essence of nature and then becoming in alignment with it. That's exactly, well, it's not exactly, but it's a similar process to what Plato does. He says there's another world of forms, and if we can that's the essence of the world, and if we can align ourselves with that essence, then everything would be good. The Stoics say that it's not a world of forms, it's not as intellectual, but still they exclude certain things from their ideal, and therefore it's necessarily the case that they think that there is an essence to the world that they are improving life by following. And by saying that, so what really is happening, and this is Nietzsche's fundamental critique of all philosophies, is that whatever a Stoic values, he says is the essence of nature. So it happens with all philosophers. What Plato valued was this world of the intellect, with these sort of intellectual, mathematical ideas. And so he said that nature was those ideas, and that he was just following nature. So the Stoics, they have their own ideals: temperance, self-control, discipline. And then they suggest, they pretend that those ideals are in fact intrinsic to nature, so that they're just following the reality of the world. They make their ideals the reality. They mistake their ideals for reality, which is fundamentally Nietzsche's critique of all philosophy, is that ideals are mistaken for reality. He says, what formerly happened with the Stoics still happens today as soon as a philosophy begins to believe in itself. It always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise. Philosophy is this tyrannical drive itself. So yeah, that's exactly what he's saying, that is the nature of philosophy. It always creates the world in its own image. And just to finish, I'll say that one of the most particular drives that Nietzsche identifies with Stoicism, that they ascribe to nature, is the desire for tyranny. It's a sort of will to power. So he says, if I can tyrannize myself, I can tyrannize nature. The Stoic thinks that if he can control and discipline himself and limit himself, because he's mistaking his ideals for nature, for reality, he thinks that he can somehow magically bridge that gap and control reality. It is really just a will to power. It's just a desire for more power in the Nietzschean sense. And I think Nietzsche's obviously not opposed to that, but that the problem with philosophy that he constantly identifies is that your ideals are mistaken for reality, and that means that your whole will to power is being wasted. Anytime you mistake your ideals for the real world, you're putting the cart before the horse. Your will to power is becoming an end rather than a means, or maybe vice versa. But Nietzsche's goal is to have the will to power flourish, and he thinks that philosophy, because it has this tendency to mistake ideals for reality, it actually, once it begins to believe in itself, as he says, it then becomes a stagnating force. And that's why Nietzsche opposed the Stoics.